Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Some of the people out there on Facebook are asking me to speak louder. So if I speak loud today, that's the reason. Today we're going to learn about a piece of dough and a slice of vision. Chapter 15, Book of Numbers, verse 17 onward. At this point, the Torah has concluded discussing the Miraglim. It has concluded discussing the consequences of that faithful decision. And from here on onward, the Torah will direct its attention toward other matters. Already before, we talked about other matters. And now we're going to talk about coming to Eretz Yisrael and performing a mitzvah which we call Challah. Now, Challah, for most people, means the bread you eat on Shabbos. And there's a good reason for that. Because even people who bought bread in the bakery, once a week, they would make the point of making bread themselves so they could perform the mitzvah of Challah. You're going to tell me, but doesn't the mitzvah of Challah necessitate coming to the land of Eretz Yisrael? And I'm going to tell you it does. It does necessitate coming to the land. However, we, in today's day and age, have a commemorative Challah. We take off a piece of dough and we burn it. But in the holy land of Eretz Yisrael, the dough is actually given to the Kohen, as we will see. Vayidaber Hashem al Moshe Leimer, introducing this new segment of the Torah. We hear once again Hashem has spoken to Moshe. And this is today's prophecy. This is today's mitzvah. Daber al bnei Yisrael, speak to the children of Israel. V'yomar ta'aleim, and you should say to them, V'vo yachem el ha'aretz, as you come into the land, asher ani mevi eschem shama, which I am going to bring you there. So the obvious question that arises when we learn this pasuk, it doesn't say ki savayu, which is the usual or typical expression used by the Torah. It says b'vo yachem. B'vo yachem means as you are coming into the land which I am going to bring you. Says Rashi, b'vo yachem al ha'aretz. The verse here begins with the idea, the mitzvah of hafrashas challah, the mitzvah of separating challah, by first telling us b'vo yachem when you come el ha'aretz. And this is to teach you that the mitzvah of challah is only applicable b'vo yachem. When you come into the land, that's when the mitzvah is binding. Says Rashi, however, mishune biyazu mikol biyes shabatera. This expression of coming, this b'vo yachem, is different than all other expressions of coming that we find in the Torah. All the time the Torah speaks about arrival in Eretz Yisrael. B'kulam nemar, in all of the various arrivals that the Torah discusses, it says kisavoy, when you will come, or kisavoyu, which is a pluralized version, when you shall come, meaning all of you. Lefichach kulam lemeides zumizu. Therefore, by using the methodology of Torah exegesis, in which we're able to derive laws from one area to another, if the Torah says kisavayu in one place, and says kisavayu with someone in another place, we would say just as the halachas are applicable in one area, in one arena, halachas would also be applicable in another arena too. But that's because they're all kindred expressions. However, v'kevan sheparat l'cha kosov ba'achas mehem she'ene elo la'acha yerusha v'yeshiva. So since in one of these instances where it says kisavayu or kisavay, it says that this means not actually when you come into Israel, but it means when you come in and settle in Israel, which we know took 14 years, 7 years to fight our enemies, 7 years to bicker amongst ourselves till the land was divided up and everybody was in his appropriate place. So the pasuk is teaching us that all of these different mitzvahs that are necessitate, that hinge upon coming into Eretz Yisrael, will only be applicable and are only binding when la'achar Yerusha v'yeshiva, after the land has been inherited and after the land has been settled. However, so just like it's in one place where it says kisavai af kulan came, the same thing applies everywhere else. Aval zu nemar ba b'vayachem. Here it doesn't say kisavayu or kisavai, it says b'vayachem. What does b'vayachem mean? That means mishenichnesu ba, from the moment you enter into the holy land of Eretz Yisrael. V'achlu milachma, you will eat of its bread. Nischayvu b'challah. So the mitzvah of Challah began not after Yerusha v'Yeshiva, not after the land was conquered and settled, but rather the mitzvah of Challah begins b'voyachem, upon arrival, quite literally. The Ksava Kabbalah explains this Rashi, and he says like this, that b'voyacha means as you arrive, or meaning in English, upon arrival. When you say kisavoi, when you come, it means like when you arrive. So, for example, you could say to somebody, when you arrive in town, give me a call. Let me know when you arrive. Let me know when you arrive doesn't necessarily mean that as soon as the plane lands, you have to call somebody. Just let me know when you arrive. Let me know when you arrive and you're settled and you're in your hotel room. Let me know when you're here. But if I say to somebody, let me know upon arrival, that means upon arrival. That would be the person you're picking up from the airport. That's the person you want to know when they touch down. So in that way, the Ksava Kabbalah explains, Rashi does not talk about the language of it. Rashi talks about the matter of fact, that in all of the other places it says kisavayu or kisavai, and therefore we're able to derive and extrapolate the halachas which are applicable in one place to the other place. Because they're all the same. Since one of them it says Achar, Yerusha v'Yeshiva, that after the conquest, after the settling, so too over here it would also apply with all the other examples. And here is different. The Ksava Kabbalah is only explaining the verbiage, why it's different, why kisavayu means something different. So what will happen? What will happen when you come? What should you do? Verse 20, Reishis arisesechem challah. The first of your kneading, first of your dough, which is challah, which is like made as when you start to have dough together, challah tarimu truma. You shall take a roll, and that should be dedicated or donated as a truma. And this could be ketrumas goyden, just like the kind of truma, just like the kind of gift you give to the kohen from the granary when you are going to be harvesting the grain in Eretz Yisrael. Kain tarimu esa. So too, you should take truma from the dough. After the dough has become kneaded, that's when it needs to be separated. So Rashi says, what does the meaning of Reishis Arisei Sechem? What does Arisa mean? Now the meaning of Isa, which means dough, is a mixture of flour and water, which have been kneaded together. It doesn't say, made Eishis Kol Isa. It says, Reishis Arisei Sechem. So Rashi explains that means, Kishetolushu, Kedei Isaschem, once you are going to knead the amount, knead with a K, once you knead the amount of your bread, Sha'atem regilin lalush bamidbar, the kind of amount that you deal with when you're in the desert. In other words, not every smidgen of the dough has to have truma separated, has to have a challah given. When you have arisei sechem can mean dough, but can also mean your dough, it can also mean your bread. So when you have reishis arisei sechem, when you have this idea of your bread being baked, of your dough, that you have a normative amount, a sufficient amount, but from that point and onward you should separate. V'kamahi, what's sufficient? Very good. Rashi has the same question. V'kamahi, how much is that? What is sufficient? Some people could eat like 3 loaves of bread and they're still not happy. And some people have a little piece of toast and they're happy and they don't need anything else. So kamahi, how much is that? So he says, V'yamaydu ba'omer. It says that they measured the manna in an omer. An omer is a measuring cup, a certain measure. Omer legel gelis, an omer per skull, an omer per person. And Rashi says, Shiurei is mem gimel beitzim. The shir is 43 eggs, v'chaimish beitzah, and 1/5 of an egg, which is actually quite a lot. And you see that, by the way, in the word challah. Ches stands for, gematria-wise. Ches is 8, lamed is 30. No, how much is that? 38. and then add hey, add 5 on, what do you get? Perfect. So you don't get 42, you get 43. That's the Mem Gimel Beitzim. That's your challah. I think it's like 10 cups. I think it's like 10 cups of challah. That's 10 cups of dough which are used.
How many loaves of that?
How many loaves? 10 cups. How many loaves?
Depends how small your loaf is.
Okay, average size challah.
5?
5 challahs. Yeah.
2 cups.
You're feeding a big family. This is not for the faint-hearted. This is not a little tiny piece of dough.
But we do it here in Klitz with less, no?
You cannot take challah with a bracha unless you have the proper amount.
Really?
Yeah. And it has to be arisa seichem, by the way. It has to be challah that you take. You're making your own bread. If you're making bread for other people, giving it out, like in Shulchan Aruch, it says if you're making bread for mishloach manot, and you're planning to give it out to everybody, you can't make a bracha. It has to be your challah. It has to be with your keeping. Shatorimu mereshisa. So once you have arisa seichem, once you have the amount of dough, which is a proper and appropriate representation, a real example of your bread, then in that case, then you have to take reshis. You have to take a little bit of it off. So shemei ani, from this I can hear rishoyne shabeisais, that it's only maybe the first dough, first challah a person bakes in life, or maybe the first challah you bake in a day. So Talmud Lemer, the pasuk says meireshis. Meireshis means not the first time I need dough, do I have to give it away to the Kohen. From meireshis is of the first, not the whole first. I don't have to make dough and give it away. Start my day off, I make a dough, give it away to the Kohen, then I can make myself. No. I create a dough, and when I have the right amount, I separate a little bit for the Kohen. And therefore, meireshis means miktsasa, a little bit apart, v'loy kula. So we're talking about a piece of dough. What should you do with this piece of dough? Titnu la Hashem truma, you give it to Hashem. Says Rashi Lafi, Shalei Shamayno, Shir Challah. Since the Torah doesn't tell us how much to give, it just tells us from what challah must be taken. How much do I have to give? So Rashi says, Ne'emar titnu, it says to give. Shehei ba kadei nesina, that it should be a giving. So for example, if you have a little smidgen of dough, can't come to the Kohen and say, oh, I have something for you. Did you do? Yeah, here, have something. Here's a little piece of dough. So what should I do with it? It has to be enough to bake what we call in Yiddish a bulke, a little loaf, a little challah. So a little loaf, the Kohen has lunch. You gave him enough dough. He can bake himself a bagel now. He can bake himself a roll. But if he doesn't have enough for a roll, then there's nothing to talk about.
So you actually gave dough as opposed to the bun?
Yeah.
But your question is, the guys did the baking.
Well, l'chatchila, you're supposed to give it when it's still dough. But b'di'evet, if somebody doesn't give it in a state of dough, then you're allowed to give it when it's cooked already, when it's baked already, when it's bread already. In fact, the Ksava Kabbalah emphasizes that this mitzvah is indeed l'chatchila, usually with dough itself. However, he says, there are some times when you can only give it after it's baked. When would that be? If a person bakes or needs a smaller amount of dough, not the whole amount of dough. So the halacha is you can't take challah. But if you bake that bread and then you need another batch, and all of the bread ends up in the same big basket, or in modern terminology, in the same freezer, then in that case it becomes obligated in a challah. It will become obligated in a challah not from the time of kneading, it will become obligated from the challah from the time that all of the bread ends up together in the same place. So it would be possible sometimes, not only b'di'evet, but even l'chatchila, for this mitzvah to be done only after it's baked already. Now, why does it say milechem ha'aretz tarimu? Milechem ha'aretz, the Ksava Kabbalah says, to emphasize it has to be what's called the 5 grains. So if you make dough out of some other form, like rice bread, or you have, what's that, the new wonder thing everybody's talking about, quinoa bread, or things like that, that's not obligated in a challah. So why does it say that there has to be just like ketrumas goyden kein tarimu gam atam? What's ketrumas goyden? So Mendel says that if a person gives a very small amount of dough, technically he could fulfill the mitzvah. Just like you could give one little kernel and fulfill the mitzvah of truma. But that's not the right thing to do. The right thing to do is an appropriate amount. And we know that when it comes to truma, when it comes to giving the special gifts to the Kohen from the harvest, we could be either a cheapskate, which means to be giving 1/60th. We can be a very, very generous person and give 1/60th. And then the average is 2%, 1/50th. So that's but the Mendel says technically there is no actual obligation. When you read Rashi, it seems like there is an obligation. It says titnu, you have to give. The Mendel says min hatayra, there is no actual obligation. You have to figure that out. Why is it called a challah? It's called a challah because it has to be an actual piece. Like we said, like Rashi said, a roll. You have to give something. As the Rash Istruk says, he says it has to be a challah means a whole loaf, a whole piece of bread, not a slice of bread. You have to give enough for a whole loaf. And why is it called challah? Challah, Ksava Kabbalah says, is because once you knead the dough, it's holy. You can't use it. Once you take off the dough and give away a small amount to the kohen, what happens to the rest of the dough? It goes from being kodesh to being chulin. Chulin means mundane, ordinary, available. So he says that's a permutation of the word challah. So how much is given? How much do we give? The pasuk now emphasizes in verse 21, from the first of your grains of your dough you give to Hashem, truma l'deresechem. You give a truma for your generations. So Rashi goes on to tell us in pasuk Chaf Aleph, how much is this? How much is this? Titnu truma. He says, "Ketrumas goyre and shaloi nema bashir." Just like we read before, that Mendel says there is no amount. Rashi agrees. Technically, minatayra, there is no amount. V'loi ketrumas meiser, not like the truma of meiser, which is once you give the truma, the meiser, to the Levi, that the Levi gets 10%, and the Levi has to separate 10% of his 10%, and the Mishnah tells us not to play games, and it has to be exact. But this is different. The truma has to be without an amount. So too also with the challah. However, Rashi says that's biblically. Avol chachamim nosnu shiur. The chachamim did give an amount. Now, what is the amount? Labal habayis, to a person who's a private baker, a private baking event. Echad mi'esrim va'arba, 1/24th, because less than 1/24th of what somebody's baking in their house is not going to be anything impressive and meaningless. People, how much do you bake in your house? You bake the bare minimum. 5 loaves is a lot. However, lanachtaim, to an industrial baker, so he's baking for many, doesn't make 5 to 10 cups of flour. He's not making 5 challahs. He's making 50, 60, 500 challahs. So for that person, you give echad arbayim v'shmeina, 1/48th. So clearly it can't be a biblical amount, because you can't say, oh, you, a balabas, you have to give more minatayra. You have to give less. Torah doesn't speak anywhere about what one's pastime is. Torah doesn't speak about what a person's calling is. Torah doesn't speak about the vocation. Torah doesn't speak about circumstances. Torah just lays the line down. It lays it down flat. So first of your dough. So first of your dough you have to give. I mean, everybody has to give the first of the dough. But Chachamim, who made a shir, Rashi says titnu. It says an amount. How much is an amount? It's also very vague. An amount. I've seen tiny little bulkas, and I've seen bulkas. How much is it? So therefore, we're given this amount, that the amount is either 1/24th or 1/48th, depending on the vocation of the baker, of the person who's actually kneading this dough and preparing it to be baked. 1/60th is the amount for truma, for that which is taken from the grain, or from the olives or oil that's harvested, according to Ramban, from all fruits. Okay, so here is the question. What can we learn from the difference of the vocations? The private baker, the public baker, the bake shop, and the private house. What lesson can we learn from this?
24 and 48.
Huh?
24 and 48.
24 and 48, okay. What lesson can we learn from it? 24 is the hours of the day. 48, the hour of 2 days. Obviously, the balabas, the person who's a private baker, is giving much more. Imagine giving 1 hour of your day or 1 hour of every 2 days. Big difference. So the Rebbe says there is a very important lesson. Page Reishlam Beis Simchafei. Yesh Lavayer es Sibas HaHevdel. The Rebbe suggests we may be able to explain the difference or the logic behind the distinction drawn of a private baker or a baker, an industrial baker. Now you have to remember that were this to be biblical, we could simply say, well, that's what the Torah says. But it's not. It's rabbinic. And all of the rabbinic decrees have a rationale attached to them. There's always a logic there. So on a simple level, the logic is that the baker bakes a large amount. And because the baker bakes a large amount, we know that the Kohen will get something meaningful even out of 1/48th. Whereas when people bake at home, they bake a small amount. So a small amount, you have to make a larger volume has to be given away of the Kohen to walk away virtually empty-handed. But the Rebbe says that there is, from a mystical perspective, there's actually a deeper lesson and a little piece of inspiration. So now we're going to go from a piece of dough to a slice of vision. Okay, listen to this. Tachlisa shel mitzvahs hafrashas challah. What is the ultimate purpose? What is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish? What does Hashem want from us when He says you should give the first of the dough to the challah? And the answer to that question is it's not just about the Kohen. It's about us too. It's l'chazek es ha'hakara. It's to strengthen our awareness. Shahalechem, which lechem, bread, is a semel, is an emblem, and an example and paradigm. L'chol tzarchei ha'adam. Like a person says, I need to bring home the daily bread. It's an expression. The person doesn't need any bread. That's not the point. So the meaning of bread is parnasa, or sustenance. That the Torah wants a person to know when he does bring home the bread, when he is successful at his vocation, and he is able to have parnasa, eine priamali shaloi. He can't say, I'm so smart, I'm so capable, I'm so effective, and that's why I made a living. It's not about derech hateva. It's not about nature. Ella, the truth is, matana shuhu mekabel ma'kadosh baruch hu. Parnasa is always a gift from on high. There are plenty of smart, hardworking people who can't make a living. There are plenty of bozos who are making a killing. And you can't really say, I know why he's making a living. He's a smart guy. That's why he's making a living. Or he's a hard worker. That's why he's making a living. It's not necessarily so. You need to have mazel. You need to have a bracha from Hashem. And this is something that people don't like to hear. And even if they don't mind hearing it, they certainly don't like taking it seriously. And when the Torah speaks about consuming bread, and Torah speaks about satiation, the Torah reminds us, Ki hu hanoisen l'chakoyach lasis choya. That Hashem gives you the strength to do valor. So even if you see a direct correlation between the hard work you invested, or between the wisdom and the cunning which you employed in order to make a living, remember, who gave you that wherewithal? HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the whole idea of us giving away is that we should be aware, we should recognize it's not ours. We didn't earn this by ourselves. Not that means we should give it all to the government. We didn't earn it by ourselves means we should recognize that it's a gift from Hashem. That's what we have to recognize. Okay. So the idea of giving the challah is to remind us it's not yours.
The first fruits.
It's like bikurim, correct? First fruits and first dough has a direct correlation. Miteva advarim, by means of nature. This is just the way it is. Hakara zu ba beyeser kalas kisha adam roya mul einav mikrim rabim. This naturally would be easier to see when many things happen, just right in front of your face, under your nose. Things which are muchashim, they're actual. Yeser av hashgacha pratis. So the more you see acts of hashgacha pratis, the more things happen fortuitously to kind of fall into place. They're mu'urayis shabehen nitan lirais. These are things which we can actually see. Begoloi es mu'uruvas shlakadosh baruch hu. You say, wow, I see the hand of Hashem. I see His fingerprints. How did you see the fingerprints? Because it's unbelievable. I wasn't even supposed to be there. I just happened to show up there. And that other person happened to come. And then he happened to know somebody else. And boom, and I made a great sale. So wow, it just happened. said, really? You think it just happened? And it could have just happened elsewise? How did it happen this way? We say coincidence is an 11-letter name for God. You think it's coincidence? Ashgacha pratis. The more Ashgacha pratis you see, the less you have to be reminded of Hashem's fingerprints. Why? Because you're dusting the fingerprints all the time. You're picking up the fingerprints every single day. The less you see that, the more of a reminder you'll need. Simple. So the Rebbe says a Gavaldik thing. Hanachtem, the industrial baker, the person who's out there making a living. So, Kabal Esek L'Parnasasei, as a person engaged in commerce, he comes in contact with all kinds of people, all kinds of deals, if you will, and he has to the matzav akayim b'shuk. He's got to deal with the market. He's got to deal with market value. He's got to deal with commodities. He's got to deal. There's stuff happening around him. He doesn't live in isolation. He's a part of a bigger economic frame, and he has to fit into that economic frame somehow. He's going to make himself a living. So it's not so simple that the baker is just going to bake the bread. All he knows how to do is bake bread. He has to know where to find cheap eggs, and he has to know when it's smart to use dough and when it's smart to raise his prices, and he has to know when commodities go up and commodities go down. It's not so simple. It's a dynamic market. Any market is dynamic. So Noichach le'itim kreves, the Rebbe says, no likelihood, very often he's going to become aware or notice, if he has his eyes open, if he wants to have some vision, he's going to see Sheyad Hashem, He HaMechavenes Es Mahalachav. He's going to see the hand of Hashem guiding him along. He's going to notice that he just happened to do this deal and he didn't even know why he was doing the deal, and then it worked out amazingly well. And he says, unbelievable. How did that just happen? He sees the hand of Hashem all the time. He sees the Yad Hashem that's Mevi'alei Hatzlacha Ba'asakav, that brings him the success in business. And Mishum Kach, because of this, he doesn't need such a big reminder. He doesn't need to give away so much dough to remember this. He's being reminded every day. He sees it all the time. However, the person is at home. In ancient times, this was usually the husband was out there slaving in the field, and the woman was out there working in the kitchen. So she's not out there. She's not seeing what he sees. What's in the house? The house is more of a cloistered environment. It can be a privately controlled environment. You don't allow alien influences in. And in the house there's a ruach, a spirit of Torah, or there should be a spirit of Yiddishkeit, or there should be. The house is a Yiddish environment. It's not out there in the big bad world. The house is my private little world. So in that private little world, which probably is designed to nurture and facilitate holiness and Jewish living. So, you don't see every day and every moment the challenges of making a living, the difficulty of dealing with the real world. You don't see it as much. So, you don't have this vision, leneged einov, of seeing the examples of Hashgacha pratis, of things happening by remarkable stroke of divine providence. And therefore, all of Lahafresh Challah b'shir gadol yesa. Because you're not seeing the hand of Hashem all the time, because you're not getting to notice the Hashgacha pratis as often, because you're not out there, that's why you have to give a bigger piece of challah. Because you're not being reminded as much. That's why Echad Esrim V'Arba, that's 124. Kedei la'avtiach, in order to ensure ha'akara b'kach, that people don't get carried away with their own accomplishments and achievements, and they remember Shekol Tzrochav Boyim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the upshot is, a piece of dough makes a big difference when it comes to a slice of vision. It depends who you are. And by extension, we could even remonstrate that the person who's involved in the atmosphere of Kedusha, sits in a kollel or a yeshiva, it's easier to forget. You don't see the miracles every single day. The person is a Baal Asik, the person is out there, sees the miracles every single day. Like the expression goes, you could learn Torah and forget about the Neisna Torah. You could learn Torah, forget that it's something Hashem gave us the Torah. But anybody who's out there, anybody who's slaving away, making a living, who sees the Hashgacha pratis, who sees that things are never what you think they are, and you can never really plan. You can plan all you want, and you should plan. You don't plan to fail, you fail to plan. But at the same time, with all the planning in the world, things don't necessarily work out. Why? Because the vision that's seen by being out there is extraordinary insofar as divine providence and Hashgacha pratis is concerned. Sometimes, therefore, the person who's out there needs less of a reminder, not more of a reminder. More dough, more vision. That is the reason we have this distinction drawn between the balabayas and between the baker. L'chaim.
When they landed up in 5 streams, do they have to be